Welcome to Stories with Mimi Laura. Our story today is about a camping trip. The name of the story is The Camping Adventure of Tammy and Tommy. It was a beautiful early summer day, and 9-year-old Tammy and her 8-year-old brother, Tommy, were buzzing with excitement. They were going on a camping trip with their dad. Mom had to work, but Dad had promised them an adventure they wouldn't forget. The car was packed with camping gear, snacks, and their favorite stuffed animals, and they sang songs the whole way to the campground. The campground was nestled in a lush forest with tall trees swaying gently in the breeze. They arrived late in the afternoon, and the sun was beginning to cast long shadows across the ground. Dad started setting up their tent while Tammy and Tommy explored the area around their campsite. "Can we go hiking, Dad, please?" Tammy begged, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Yeah, please, Dad," Tommy echoed, bouncing on his toes. Dad looked up from the tent he was setting up. "All right, but you need to stay together. Stay on the path and only go a short way. Do you promise?" "Yes, we promise," they chimed together. Tammy grabbed Tommy's hand and they set off on the trail. The forest was alive with the sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating a magical, dappled effect on the ground. Tammy admired the wildflowers blooming along the path, each one more beautiful than the last. As Tammy stopped to admire a particularly vibrant patch of wildflowers, Tommy's mischievous side took over. He decided it would be funny to play a trick on his sister. Quietly, he slipped behind some big rocks and sat very still, stifling his giggles. Tammy finished examining the flowers and turned around. "Tommy!" she called, but there was no answer. She called again, a bit louder this time. "Tommy, where are you?" Panic began to rise in her chest when she couldn't see him anywhere. She called out one more time, her voice shaking but still no response. Frightened, Tammy turned and ran back to the campsite. Tommy waited for a few moments, expecting Tammy to find him and laugh at his joke. But as the seconds ticked by, he realized he was all alone. He stood up and looked around, but everything looked different from his hiding spot. He started walking, but in the wrong direction, away from the path they had taken. The further he walked, the more unfamiliar everything seemed. The trees looked taller and the forest denser. He started to see different sights, strange mushrooms, unfamiliar bushes, and the occasional scurrying animal. With every step, his confidence dwindled, and fear began to take his place. He sat down on a stump, tears welling up in his eyes. He wished he had never played the trick. Suddenly he felt a rustling noise. He heard something. His heart pounded. The forest seemed to close in around him, every sound magnified. He heard more rustling in the trees above. "Tommy, where are you?" It was Dad and Tammy. He jumped up and ran towards them, tears streaming down his face. He ran into their arms and Dad hugged him tightly. "Oh, Tommy, we were so worried," Tammy cried, hugging him too. Dad looked at Tommy, his face a mix of relief and sternness. "Tommy, you shouldn't have wandered off. You gave us quite a scare." "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry, Tammy. I just wanted to play a trick," Tommy sobbed. Back at the campsite, the sun had set and the stars were beginning to twinkle in the night sky. Dad lit a campfire and they gathered around it, the warmth and light comforting them after the scare. They roasted marshmallows, the sweet gooey treats making them feel a bit better. Tammy and Tommy took turns telling stories, and soon they were laughing again. Dad suggested they made up a song about their adventure. As the fire crackled and the night grew dark, Dad looked at Tammy and Tommy. "You both learned something important today. Can you tell me what it was?" Tammy thought for a moment. "We learned that it's important to stay together and follow the rules." Tommy nodded. "And that playing tricks can be dangerous. I'm really sorry, Tammy." Tammy smiled and hugged her brother. "It's okay, Tommy. I'm just glad you're safe." Dad smiled, proud of his children. "That's right. It's always important to think about the consequences of our actions and to look out for each other." The next morning, the sun rose, casting a golden glow over the campsite. Birds chirped, and the air was fresh and cool. Tammy and Tommy woke up to the smell of Dad cooking breakfast over the campfire. As they ate their pancakes and bacon, they talked about the adventures they would have that day. This time, they promised to stay together and to listen to each other. After breakfast, they packed up their gear and headed out for another hike, this time with Dad leading the way. They explored the forest, found a bubbly brook, and even spotted a family of deer grazing in a meadow. Throughout the day, Tammy and Tommy stuck close together, pointing out interesting plants and animals to each other. They took turns leading the way, making sure they were always within sight of Dad. The forest seemed less scary and more like a place of wonder and discovery. They found a perfect spot for a picnic and enjoyed their lunch surrounded by the beauty of nature. They laughed and talked about their favorite parts of the trip so far. When they got back to the campfire, they spent the evening playing games and talking about all the things they had seen and learned. On their last day, they packed up their campsite, leaving it as clean and tidy as they had found it. As they drove home, Tammy and Tommy looked out the window, already planning their next camping adventure. "Next time, we'll bring Mom, too," Tammy said, and Tommy agreed. As they pulled into their driveway, Dad turned to them and said, "I'm proud of you both. You learned a lot this trip, and we had a great adventure together." Tammy and Tommy smiled, feeling happy and proud. They knew they would always remember this camping trip and the important lesson they had learned. And the lesson is always stay together and follow the rules when exploring new places to ensure everyone's safety. Think carefully about the consequences of your actions and look out for each other to prevent unnecessary worry and danger. Here are some questions for you to consider. Question 1. Why is it important to stay together and follow the rules when you're exploring? Question 2. What lesson did Tommy learn from his experience of getting lost? Question 3. Can you think of a time when you learned an important lesson from an adventure or a mistake? What happened? Thank you for listening to Stories with Mimi Laura.